Now, without much further ado, all the way from across the ditch, as they say, is Nicola Toki. Nicola is a New Zealand conservationist and head of the country's largest conservation organisation, Forest and Bird. Nicola has an impressive history of conservation leadership and advocacy for New Zealand's wildlife and wild places, having worked in a range of jobs across the private and public sector for almost 20 years. Please welcome Nicola.
I don't think I need my glasses either. Tēnā koutou katoa, I rere ana take mihi kia koutou. Kei tahara koa ahau I roto I tēnei whare ki tēnei kaupapa. Ki te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Ki ngā wāhine toa, tēnā koutou. Rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou. Ko Nicola Toki tuku ingoa. Toi tū te marae a tāne, toi tū te marae a tangaroa, toi tū te tangata. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Before I continue, I'll just reflect on what I just said in Te Reo Māori, one of Aotearoa New Zealand's two official languages. And as an aside, our other official language is New Zealand Sign Language, not English. And hi to all you people out there in the interweb. So it's lovely to be here today. I open this speech by greeting you all in our official language of Te Reo Māori and telling you how happy I am to be here in this room to talk about this important topic. I greeted the original people of this land, mana whenua, people who hold standing pride and mandate over the land. And this is directed to the traditional custodians of the land, where we stand today, and for those traditional owners, more broadly for Australia and its wild wonders. I greeted the wāhine toa. Wāhine means woman, toa means staunch. The brave woman, the woman of strength, or warrior woman, and you all know who you are. And I greeted our leaders, the rangatira, the ministers, the chiefs, the leaders, the advocates, the motivators, the drivers of our crucial message about nature. So the tikanga, or the protocol in New Zealand of a mihi or a greeting, is to include a whakatauki, a saying that sums up what you'd like to focus on. And I chose one of my favourites. Toi tū te marae a tāne, toi tū te marae a tangaroa, toi tū te tangata means if the land is well and the sea is well, the people will thrive. And I can't think of a more crucial and poignant way of describing the challenge and the opportunity that we find ourselves facing today. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here to celebrate International Women's Day with this, the 12th annual Women in Conservation Breakfast. I don't know if you've noticed, but Australians and New Zealanders are sometimes a little bit competitive. I am quite jealous we don't do this in New Zealand. I've told Heather and Corinne that I'm going to steal it. And I'll be able to extend the invitation back over the Dutch. So I can't tell you how stoked I was when Megan from Bush Heritage Australia contacted me to ask me to participate in this uniquely Australian, for now, event. So, well look, my name is Nicola, or Nick, never Nikki, unless you're my father-in-law who only calls me Nikki. And I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Forest and Bird Protection Society of New Zealand. Our other name is Te Reo Te Taio, which I think more aptly describes our job. So Te Reo Te Taio means to give nature a voice. So Forest and Bird is the largest and longest serving environmental NGO in New Zealand, and this month we celebrate our 100th birthday. And you know how I've got friends who, when it's their birthday, particularly once you get it like into your 40s, and so they have a birthday week. I've told my team we're having a birthday year. So we'll spend the year celebrating this, giving nature a voice. And it's a real honour to be able to do that in Australia today, in Melbourne today. So, long story short, I promised Megan I'm taking this very seriously, so I've written a speech. Usually I wing it, but I'll probably deviate throughout, and probably someone who is properly keeping tabs on time, Tanya, will have to come and yank me off the stage at some point, or play music loudly or something, turn the microphones off. I did have a speech thought out. Over the last couple of weeks, I've had to change it slightly, and that's because in New Zealand, Cyclone Gabrielle back home has changed everything. So the sheer power of climate change has suddenly whacked us in the face. And right now, thousands of people in my country are displaced. They've lost everything. Some have lost family members. Some have lost every possession they own. Their land has disappeared, and there are still people unaccounted for. The destruction of Cyclone Gabrielle will not be fixed for many years to come. And as climate change impacts tend to do, it has unfairly impacted on some of our poorer communities, and in particular our Māori communities. The point about this is the time for talking is over. It's a real privilege as a leader of a New Zealand environmental NGO to be here amongst contemporaries, friends, family, and of the Australian environmental leaders I see in the room before me this morning, and in particular, I really do want to acknowledge the work of Bush Heritage Australia and Trust for Nature, who I reckon have a really fascinating model of how to protect what I like to call back home as the nature. I'm constantly telling my team to, what are we doing out in the nature? How will we tell people to protect the nature? The way that your organisations, and many of you, because what I see is a lot of collaboration and a lot of connecting the dots, and I've seen it already this morning, working with traditional landowners, working with communities, farmers, individuals, to hang on to as much of the nature as possible, and to demonstrate the resilience that she provides. Given what we've seen in New Zealand in the past month, as climate change whacked us, I think it's clear we're going to need all the resilience she's got. So I've been asked to share a little bit about myself, which will be quite hard because I'm quite shy, but okay. How much time have I got? Also, just as an aside, and I do this, and I think I got this from my mother, so I will just go off on little tangents. I was recently lucky enough to, back in New Zealand, go and see Hugh van Cuylenburg speak, and he does the same thing that I do, and he describes it as he has thoughts circling like planes circling an airport, and every now and then one just comes into land. That's what I do. So you have to blame, and he's from Melbourne, right? So it's his fault. And what I was going to say is, my brother and his family live they live in Melbourne, they live in Lilydale, but they used to live in Airlie Beach. And I once tried to buy a cup of coffee at Brisbane Airport on my way to Proserpine. And there was a queue of people building up behind me, and I stood at and the reason I'm telling you this story is just to check you can understand me. Because I stood at the front of this queue, and knowing I had to catch another flight, and it was a very busy little, coffee cart in the airport, and I went to the counter, and I thought I was really clear, right? I wanted a trim flat white. What I think the lovely lady behind the counter heard was a trim flat white. And so we embarked on this 8-minute conversation where I said, look, I really would like it. Please, can I have a trim flat white? And people were lining up behind me and getting kind of grumpy, and she was going, what? And then eventually the light bulb went off, and she went, you mean a skinny latte? So that's just my temperature check to make sure you can understand me. So back to me. I started life as a conservationist at a very early age, and mostly that was kind of camping with my parents. We didn't do much tramping. In New Zealand, everyone loves tramping. I don't, because I don't really like shared accommodation. So, anyway, I spent a lot of time watching my nana on her farm in the wildest parts of the southernmost part of the South Island. And she had native bush up the back of the farm, and so did all the neighbours. And when the neighbours decided to bring the bulldozers in and plant hardwoods, she stuck to her guns, and she held on to it. And she taught me a lot about the bush. She taught me how to call a fantail. I think your version is a willy wagtail. That's not a rude word, is it? Okay. Down to her fingers. She taught me how to be warm and engaging to people, but to have a backbone of steel when what you love most is at stake. And I think that's what I see in this room here today, and I imagine what I imagine out there in the interweb. And then growing up, I was really lucky. I was lucky to live in some of Aotearoa, New Zealand's most beautiful places as a kid. So my dad, who'd failed school certificate at least twice, mostly because he chose to go surfing instead of sit through the exams, all he wanted to do was be a ski plane pilot and land on glaciers in Aoraki Mount Cook National Park. And that eventually led to him passing his pilot's licenses and my family moving to the national park when I was 7 years old. So the impact of living under the shadow of New Zealand's tallest mountain, Aoraki, meant that nature, whether I knew it or not, was indelibly linked on my soul, or inked on my soul. And I also spent much of my childhood, because after you'd done a couple of years at what the grown-ups called the Rock, which was Mount Cook, you were allowed to move to the bustling metropolis of Twizel, which was sort of, I don't know, a few hundred people in the middle of the Mackenzie Plains, and I had a misspent youth there shooting rabbits on the local airstrip, and that helped me develop my understanding of pest control in this country. So the irony, though, of living amongst New Zealand's tallest mountains and glaciers is that when I was a kid, which was some time ago, not that long ago, there was no lake at the bottom of the Tasman Glacier. And now there is a thriving tourism industry that takes people jet boating among the icebergs in an enormous lake. Indeed, the glacier ice volume in New Zealand has decreased by 38% from 1962 to 2018. And what that means is every year we lose enough water from those glaciers, those things that define, the postcards of our country. We lose enough water to fill 164,000 Olympic swimming pools every year. So that's happened in my lifetime. And the climate and biodiversity crisis is staring us in the face. And our challenge as conservation leaders is to bring people with us to understand and to act. I've held a number of roles. I have a bit of a revolving door. So my most recent job was as a senior leader for the Department of Conservation. In fact, I looked after all the rangers. And prior to that, I worked for Fonterra, working on a conservation partnership with them. I wanted to be a ranger. I've worked for DOC 3 times. I've never been a ranger, which is annoying. I also wanted to be David Attenborough. And what I realised, I might not be David Attenborough, but what I realised was I'm a storyteller, and storytelling is important. And it took me a long time to say I'm a storyteller, but without that, we're not going to bring people with us. So as Chief Executive of Forest and Bird, I have the privilege of standing on the shoulders of giants. That's not hard for me because I'm quite small. And I've taken the role just as our society turns 100, right? So for 100 years, Forest and Bird, or a few of the people that get grumpy at Forest and Bird, you're known as Twig and Tweet. Which is why my Instagram profile is Twig and Tweet Boss. So we've been at the forefront of raising awareness about the nature challenges that we face as a country and then doing stuff, including in our reserves, in partnership with others, and often by our thousands and thousands of volunteers. So it's a real honour to lead this organisation with such a big history at this crucial time in our world as we all stare down the barrel of a biodiversity and a climate crisis coming right up against each other. Which brings me to my personal philosophy about storytelling, right? So that's why we're all here. We're weaving stories of nature into the souls of people so that they act. And in Australia and New Zealand, we have a unique opportunity that relates to our national identity. So, to begin, we all know that Australia and New Zealand have unique species and ecosystems found nowhere else on the planet. So New Zealand can simply be described as the land without teeth. So if it has 4 legs and fur, it doesn't belong in New Zealand. And the litany of introduced pests have devastated our unique and ancient wildlife, including, of course, the fattest parrot in the world, the kakapo. Yes, the one that did the bad thing to the presenter's head on the BBC programme. We have frogs with no tadpoles. We have bats that fold up their wings and burrow through the leaf litter on the forest floor. We have weta, you'd call them king crickets, I think, heavier than a song thrush that could fill the palm of your hand. And of course we have the kiwi, the only bird in the world with nostrils at the end of its beak, with tiny wings, which remind us that once in the deep dark past, it more closely resembled our mental model of a bird, and whose fierce and hard-case nature we've taken on as our national identity across the world. And then there's Australian wildlife. Some of the most beautiful and straight-out bonkers nature I've ever seen in my life. So, all joking aside, I've been lucky enough to spend time here and see face-to-face some of the wildlife of Australia. So, during my time, one of the roles I held in DOC for some time was the Threatened Species Ambassador, which was basically similar to your Threatened Species Commissioner, and I travelled here and had some engagement with your previous Commissioner. And that means that I've seen behind the scenes the amazing work of Zoos Victoria, for example, on species such as quolls, tiny pygmy possums, also don't say possums in New Zealand. I saw the work going on out at Healesville around how to look after orange-bellied parakeets, and I even got to cuddle a baby wombat. But probably my favourite experience was joining the scientists working on platypus spot out in the suburbs here in Melbourne, who took us out at night to find platypus. They're very clear with me. It is platypus or platypuses. It is not platypi. And we basically went round and round a whole lot of nets, and it got to after midnight and we'd caught some really interesting freshwater crayfish, or yabbies. We kept catching the same mother duck and her ducklings, and didn't matter how many times we took her out. Next time we came around to the trap, she was back in there. And it got a bit late, and the scientists were very kind and said that, you guys can go back to your hotel and have a sleep. And I said, yeah, but I really, really want to see a platypus. And they said, we'll call you. And so I think just before 5 in the morning, we got the call. I almost went to see a platypus in my pyjamas. And it was an amazing experience. It was also amazing to be a part of citizen science and watch that happening on the ground. And I suppose that's the point, right? We share this duty as citizens of our 2 countries, remnants of Gondwana, to protect the last of the things that remain here, because they simply don't live anywhere else. And that brings me to national identity and how to bring people with us on this journey. So, because I am a recidivist defender at all of the nature organisations in New Zealand, the last time I was at Forest and Bird, which was 12 years ago, I got hold of this study, and it was by an international market research company, I think called Practica. And what the study showed was that, what their job was they got paid a lot of money to go around and figure out how to sell stuff to people, right? So how to sell, I don't know, Big Pharma or Coca-Cola or cars or whatever. And this particular study was about understanding how citizens of countries identified as citizens of those countries. And so they went around 200 countries, and every country said the things that defined them as citizens of those countries were things like freedom of speech, liberty, democracy, things that obviously here in Australia and back in New Zealand we all take for granted, because in New Zealand, the number one defining characteristic of people of New Zealand was connection to nature and connection to the land. Similar in Australia, right? And so when you are a statistician, which I am not, but I imagine some of you are statistician-y type people, if you have real outliers like that, you either try and understand what they mean or you clean your data and get rid of them, right? So, I know you do. That nervous laughter tells me all I need to know. So they decided to have a look at about what these, people down here were getting at. And what they found, I'll start with New Zealand, what they found was that even though we, in the last 2 generations in New Zealand, most of us have moved off the land and into the towns, right? And like Australia, we have a very high urbanisation rate. I think it's about 87%. Even though that, New Zealanders described their connection to nature, to the mountains, the bush, and the sea as, quote, ethereal, almost soulful. So for the people of Aotearoa New Zealand, nature is our church. Australia, slightly different. So Australia's connection was very much about survival. I think because you live in a landscape where everything can kill you. And so if it's not the box jellyfish, it's the bitey things or the stingy things. But that's powerful, right? And that's why when you see an advertisement for a particular kind of car in New Zealand, you will see it driving along the side of Lake Wakatipu near Queenstown. You'll see the mountains and you'll hear this sort of wah wah, like ethereal music. Because they're tapping into who we think we are. But this is what we need to do. In Australia, it's more like running over things and trying, So our natural world in New Zealand and Australia is uniquely placed to connect people with nature, even though 86% of us live in urban, so that's Australia's, by the way, in urban and suburban environments. So this is a gift. This is a gift that as conservation leaders we must capitalise on. So this is about what it means to be Australian, what it means to be from Aotearoa New Zealand. And so the message is that to chip away at the wild places and the wildlife that belongs here and back home is to chip away at the very notion of who we are. And if we build that story, we're more than halfway there. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about my philosophy, my personal philosophy, and it's pretty easy. It is this. My philosophy is about walking a tightrope of hope with apathy on one side and just utter helplessness on the other. And I'll get to that in a minute. So you will notice that I am wearing a necklace. One of my team thought it was a sparrow. It's not. This is a black robin. So I don't know if you know the story of the black robin in New Zealand, but it is a powerful story of hope. So in the 1980s, when I was a kid, and I was just saying to Diana at the table, I used to collect the wildlife cards out of the Weet-Bix boxes. And one of them was the black robin. At the time, in the 1980s, because cats had basically annihilated their tiny little population in the Chatham Islands, which is hundreds of kilometres off the east coast of New Zealand, the population got down to 5 individuals. Just 5. This is a species found nowhere else in the world, like nothing else in the world. And of that 5, just 1 was a female. So her name was Old Blue, and she was relatively old, as black robins go, and she was very creatively named for the blue band on her leg. And Old Blue, and I wanted to tell this story because this is the story, particularly for the women and the supporters of women in this room. She saved her species. She didn't do it alone. So she had the support of the rangers and the scientists and the people who never gave up, right? But that is the point, because I don't know about you, but if I came across a species that had 5 individuals and 1 female left, I would probably sit down on the floor and start crying. And the people involved who were in the wildlife service at the time refused to give up. So the first thing that they noticed was that when there was a storm, so she had laid some eggs, her and her mate, who was also creatively known as Old Yellow. Guess what colour band he had. They had a storm, they lost their eggs, they immediately mated and she laid eggs again. And Don Merton, who was in the wildlife service at the time, went, I know what to do. So she laid the eggs, he took them away. And he gave them, initially, the rangers gave them to another species of bird called a tomtit. And so she laid some more, we gave them away. Laid some more, gave them away, and started building this population. But for a little while, they just built a population of black robins who thought they were tomtits, which was no good when it came to the dating game. So through trial and error, they worked out how to move these things around and eventually tuck the chicks back under the black robins so the black robins could raise the chicks. Now that population stands today at about 200 to 300. They are still in trouble, but so they're not out of the woods yet, but they are a lot better off than 1 female and 5 individuals. And so hope means everything, right? Hope drives to action. And what I notice about nature people, naturey people, I can say that because I am one, is we tend to do one of 2 things when we're selling nature, right? We either smack people over the head with how bad everything is, and we say, in fact, one of my team said to me recently, but Nicola, the planet is literally burning and we're all going to die. And I said, well, that might be true, but that's probably not going to get us anywhere. So we tend to, because we work so hard, right? Many of us in this room have dedicated our lives to trying to get people to know the things that we know. And it's frustrating and it's heartbreaking to constantly be dealing with just a level of disengagement that means that we watch things potentially slipping through our fingers. But we're not going to win people over by telling them that everything sucks. So the tightrope of hope is this. If you just tell people how bad everything is, which is why I can't read articles about climate change, because I just feel completely disengaged. What do I do about that? How do I engage with that? I don't know. So I sit in the wardrobe and pull my duvet over my head. Sorry, doona. But the other thing I've seen is we go out and we say, isn't nature nice? Isn't this species cute? I did it. I cuddled a wombat. But how do people engage with that? So the key to any good story, and just by the by, the secret to my success is I am a Star Wars aficionado. And Star Wars is really good at this. So the key to any good story is to let people know there's something at stake. Black robins are in trouble. There's only 5 left, that's quite bad. But if we do this, or even better, and if we do this, this is the difference we can make. Because people will come with you on that journey. So, tightrope of hope, apathy, nature is nice, look how cute this thing is, everything sucks, we're all going to die. So, when we hold that tension, we bring people with us. And it's not easy, right? We have some major problems facing us right now. New Zealand is often held up as a leader in conservation, and that is true to an extent, right? We've nailed offshore protection from pests. Congrats on Macquarie Island, by the way. I was there when the cats had been eradicated, but the rabbits were still there. So it's really nice to hear that they're gone as well. I could have offered my services given my childhood, but... In New Zealand, our entire economy is driven by our natural world. That's a big call, but I 100% am banking that I'm right. So if you are not vested in tourism, if you are not invested in branding the things we sell overseas, everything we do is hinged on people's perception of what New Zealand is. Clean, green New Zealand, 100% pure, but not really. We have the 6th highest emissions per capita. Most of that comes from methane and nitrous oxide from farming, and half of all our emissions come from farming, but we're not ready to say that farming should participate in the responsibilities associated with dealing to climate change yet. That is a major disconnect for New Zealand, and something that's actually not fair on the farming community either. Because sooner or later the reality is going to hit, and every year that we delay is a year we are making it harder for the farmers to be able to adapt and to contribute. Water quality in New Zealand, not flash, and we have created systems that basically mean you can't swim in many of our rivers these days. We love to be number 1, we especially love to be number 1 if Australia is number 2. We have the dubious honour of being the number 1 country for proportion of threatened species per capita. Yay! We have 10% of our wetlands left. In 200 years, we've got rid of 90% of our wetlands. And it is not a political priority, and that is challenging. And one of the things that I do in my role is spend a lot of time trying to convince politicians that investing in nature is the thing that you do in any business, right? You invest in an asset that delivers your return in order to ensure a sustainable income. You don't whittle it down to nothing, cross your fingers and hope for the best. But there is hope. As of the last year, we've had an emissions reduction plan. Forest and Bird was instrumental in writing a chapter, or supporting a chapter on nature-based solutions. We have an adaptation plan, we have a climate emergency budget, we have a thing called Jobs for Nature, we have a new biodiversity strategy, and some key businesses are stepping up. So people are shifting. And every weekend, thousands of people go out and do pest control, planting, restoration, and enjoy and love our plants and animals. And I just want to make a special mention to the youth at this point. I know there are a few youth in the room, and there's particularly a table over there somewhere. Hello. One of the things that is new to Forest and Bird since I've come in is we have a youth come back in, is we have a youth network. So we have a Kiwi Conservation Club which takes you up until about 14, and you can get out and play in the nature with your friends and some of our team who will support you. But we didn't have anything for the youth, kind of sort of 16 to 24. And I have just employed 2 of the youth network in Forest and Bird because they're just so inspiring. I thought when I met them, I was going to go in and tell them all off. But actually, they're lovely people, and they have an energy that I seem to remember I might have had back in the distant past. And so, for example, I don't know if you guys are having one today, but in New Zealand we're having a school strike for climate, which the Forest and Bird Youth Network are leading on behalf of Forest and Bird, and my team, I've told them their teams are allowed to back out of work early this afternoon so they can go along and support them. And my final point about this, I'm going over time, aren't I, Tanya? Can I keep going? I'm going to. So here's the other thing. One of the things that I think we're really not very good at in conservation land is we're not very good at being fun, right? Conservation is so earnest. And God, we're so boring about it. Like, can we please be fun? And things, words like biodiversity. Like, so I really want to encourage us all to be fun and funny, but if you're not funny, don't be funny. It's not nice. And I've had some examples of that, and I'll just quickly touch on them before I get thrown off. So 8 years ago, when I took on the role of Threatened Species Ambassador for the Department of Conservation, I got a call to appear on national radio, which Radio New Zealand was our big radio station, public radio station, to talk about why we were losing corporate sponsorships. We'd lost a couple. And while I was being interviewed by this man I'd never heard of before, I heard myself say things like, well, the challenge with leveraging synergies, and something, and I realised he was bored, which meant everyone listening must have been bored. I was bored, and I like to think of myself as quite interesting. So, which is why I'm not getting off the stage. So I said, you know what, Jessie? The trouble is this. Everyone wants to sponsor a bloomin' K-bird in New Zealand. Everyone wants to sponsor a kakapo or a kiwi or a kaka. And no one cares about Smeagol the gravel maggot, which was a species I just found out about from the marine scientist the week before, which is a tiny, air-breathing nudibranch that lives in the spaces between the gravel on south coast Wellington beaches, and it's about the size of my fingernail and looks like a bogey. Now, what's really interesting, and I put down the phone and I thought, I've ruined it. And the phone rang and it was this producer, and she said, can you come on every week? So every week for 8 years, I have gone on national radio and talked, and we have a session called Critter of the Week. We have covered everything from dog vomit, slime mould, to dead man's fingers, tree fungus. And people love it. Like, it's become so every year we produce T-shirts and we raise money for conservation, work on the ground. We had bake a critter one year. We had knit a critter, where hundreds and hundreds of people knitted their favourite critter. One woman made a freshwater crayfish hat. And it has really built more of a movement in terms of conservation. So make it fun. It doesn't have to be so earnest. And I want to speak about women's role in this space. So it's not surprising that all over the world, our environment is described as nature, as mother, right? So Mother Earth, Mother Nature. We heard it from Uncle Tony earlier this morning. I've heard it again. Back home in New Zealand, she is known as Papa Tuanuku, the mother of all life, mother of Tāne Mahuta, god of the forest, Tangaroa, god of the sea, and all their brothers. So to hurt Papa Tuanuku is to hurt your mother, and we don't want to do that. And the challenge, I think, is that in conservation, what we've done in New Zealand at least, is we've said nature's something that happens over there. It's over there where people who wear Gore-Tex like to walk around in. And we haven't kind of connected people with nature here, and that we are part of it, right? And so for the women out there who have children, and the dads, for everyone who has children, let them explore their backyards, parks, beaches, and ask what bug is this, usually just before they stick it in their mouth. Just a disclaimer, in New Zealand nothing's poisonous, so it's okay to do that in New Zealand. It might not be okay to do that here. Look, being a woman in conservation is hard. I attended a meeting last year that I was a member of a trust in part of my role, and the chair started talking about the problem with the staff turnover was that ladies kept leaving to have babies. And I have this constant internal monologue going on, and depending on your generation, it's either Reginald Perrin or Ally McBeal, and it was my first meeting, and I heard myself say, don't say anything, it's your first meeting, you don't need to say anything, you know. And then I heard someone, me, blurt out, excuse me, Mr. Chair, and he said, he sort of looked surprised, and I said, as a woman who returned to work when my son was 6 months old because my husband decided to be the caregiver, do you think maybe we should say parents are choosing to have families instead of ladies choosing to have babies? And then they all just looked at me like, why is this lady talking? The other thing that comes up a lot is, emotive. A previous boss of mine told me I was getting emotive. You're damn right I'm emotive. Of course I'm emotive. I'm emotional as hell about what's going on here, and we shouldn't have to put that in a box. That's our, I heard Corinne talking about superpowers. That's our superpower. Bloody oath I'm emotive. My son's future's at stake. So use it, don't hide it. Tanya, at this point in the proceedings, I'll ask how much longer I'm allowed to talk for. Very little. Okay. She did that so beautifully. I can talk about predator-free New Zealand until the cows come home. I'm happy to do that in networking. What I would say is that the gift in New Zealand with predator-free is the four legs and furry things are easy for all of us to come together about. So I don't have the same kind of, we would say raru in Māori, tension with the farming community about predator-free that I do about water, for example, because they want to get rid of the predators as well, and I'm happy to discuss that over the breaks. I will finish by talking about partnering with Māori. So I took the job very deliberately a year ago because I genuinely believe that in New Zealand we're having a conversation with ourselves about who we are as a nation. It's like we just woke up and went, geez, it's not 1955 anymore. And if that's the case, who are we? And what does that mean? And what does the treaty or te tiriti mean in a New Zealand modern context? And so I wanted to be part of that conversation, and I wanted Forest and Bird to be at the table. But to be at the table, we have to represent the people of New Zealand. My son is a direct descendant of Pataone, who, with his brother, Tamati Wakaneni, rallied iwi up north to sign the treaty. The treaty was actually about getting the British subjects to behave, because they weren't, and Māori couldn't control them, so they asked the Queen to try and help them out. The treaty is a challenging space to work in, but it is a very powerful thing. It is enshrined in our law, and it is unique to our country, and it is still evolving in terms of what that means. We have a lot of opportunities to work together as people, and I heard Uncle Tony speak of it earlier. We can only tackle these challenges in front of us by acknowledging our differences and superpowering them to help us achieve positive outcomes for what is looking like a bit of a bleak situation unless we do so. women in particular have a really important role in Māori society, and in particular, women have a role in nurturing relationships, and that's where I think we could all work together. So I will finish with this. My message to you is one of hope and action and fun. Find the light and the humour in these things we're so earnest about, and use that to build people's love of nature into a force for nature. I will finish by using the words of the late Don Merton, who was known across New Zealand as the man who saved the black robin, and he said this: "They are our national monuments. They are our Tower of London, our Arc de Triomphe, our pyramids. We don't have this ancient architecture that we can be proud of and swoon over in wonder, but what we do have is something far, far older than that. No one else has kiwi. No one else has kakapo. They have been around for millions of years, if not thousands of millions of years, and once they're gone forever. And it's up to us to make sure they never die out." Thank you.
Okay, now it's time to hand over to you, because we've got a very intelligent and fun brain here to pick. I could do all of the questions in the question and answer session quite easily, but it's not all about me. So there are two people who have microphones. So if people want to put their hand up, then we will take questions from the audience. So if you have a burning question, pop your hand up and we will... and I can see that there is a hand over there and a microphone headed towards it. And a reminder too for the online audience that there's the ability to send through questions, and that's why I've got an iPad here on my lap. Okay. So our first question over here.
Hi, I'm Sue Bendel from Upper Yarra Landcare. Firstly, I'd like to say to you, thank you for entertaining and informative chat. New Zealand is so lucky to have you as a voice for nature. And since you said you had a relative in Lilydale, and your story of Old Blue resonated with me so much, maybe you'll get the opportunity to visit an exhibition that's starting at the Yarra Rangers Museum in Lilydale tomorrow, where for the first time a little helmeted honeyeater who was known as Green Green but affectionately known as Super Mum, for obvious reasons because she successfully raised so many fledglings, will be on display at a art exhibition showing our faunal emblems, the helmeted honeyeater and the leadbeater possum. But to my question...
I was thinking I was almost going to have to Tony Jones you and say,
I like the cut of your jib.
You spoke about restoring nature. I have a view on that, which I don't know if anyone else in this room agrees with, but given the complexities of nature and all her interrelationships, I believe we are still only scratching the surface of understanding ecosystems. So how can we speak of restoring them? Surely what we should be doing is just avoiding clearing any existing patches of nature that still are about. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure, thank you. I got to see the helmeted honeyeater the last time I was here, so I do know what you're talking about. And as an aside, art and nature are crucial, by the way, so to the creative people and the artists and the poets and the musicians in the room and the comedians, crucial. So, yes, I agree. How do we restore something when we don't even understand the intricacies of what that means is a big challenge, and I have a really simple approach to this. My approach is to get to instill a love of learning and questioning and understanding and curiosity about nature. And when I was talking to the minister earlier, she reflected on the fact she's also Minister for Early Childhood, and so you have bush